Good morning and welcome back, everyone. I think we can continue, we can resume our session from this morning. We'll be discussing the water-based systems. So I would first would like to introduce our panel. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to those returning from yesterday for some very interesting presentations. That's part of quite a sort of a nice challenging debate as well, which is always welcome. And also welcome our new panelists. And you know, along with our ESR, so I'll just start off from Marialena Nikolopoulou from the Kent School of Architecture and Planning. I'm the UK lead for the Soloclim, and I've got with me our researchers working with Valentina Dessi from Milan Polytechnic. Would you like to say your name?
Of course. Hi, everyone. Welcome back, and hi to the new ones. And I'm Mariana Pereira. I'm right now doing my PhD at Politecnico di Milano, currently based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, in a secondment with Arcadis, Netherlands. I have my background in architecture and civil engineering, water engineering, and I did my master's in urban planning and public health. So very excited now to be working with water and microclimate.
And Andrea?
Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for being here. We're excited to see you all again. I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Adrian Moleria, and I'm also in the water-based solution research with Soloclim. And I'm specifically studying the microclimate or local areas in the smaller scale. And my objective is to create prototypes, and I'm testing different solutions to cool down outdoor areas. And I'm creating these prototypes with different principles, techniques, followed by antique architecture, historical architecture, inspired by those, and following these principles to create new innovative prototypes. And so we will be discussing about that as well, together with Mariana, that she has a macro scale. So with further ado, thank you.
So if I could ask our online panel to introduce yourselves, and if you want 5 minutes to introduce your work, I will go, there's no set hierarchy. I will go around the screen as I can see them. I mean, it says roundtable discussion, it's more like rectangle discussion. So Jeroen, if you would like to go first.
Oh, yes, please. So my name is Jeroen Kluk. I'm professor at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Also civil engineer, water-based, but now from mainly water systems, more working on climate adaptation in urban areas, and lately mainly on heat stress, but before this also on extreme rainfall. And I presented a small thought, and I wanted just to introduce you with this. In the Netherlands, we are working a lot with urban typologies, and in fact, we even have a map of the whole of the Netherlands indicating what topology is each urban area. So small urban areas, we all indicated what topology it is. It's like, of course, the inner city, but also the garden city, post-war residential area. We even have a cauliflower area. It's very curved roads. So we have different areas, and we argue that those topologies can help municipalities, but also in research, to say what climate risks are there, what climate solutions fit, because those topologies, they are different in amount of green, amount of urban space, amount of bicycle lanes, building height, time of building. So they really depict the time in which they were built. And yesterday I already presented some of this for the extreme rainfall, and we're also now using this for urban heat. But I really wonder, are there other researchers who want to do something on this, and maybe we can work together on this in one of the new calls on the Horizon 2020, in which you really ask how can we help municipalities to show that climate adaptation is possible. So that was my little point I wanted to make.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Jeroen. And if we could move with Marjorie, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Marjorie Mize. I have been working 16 years in Nantes School of Architecture. And I'm now research director in CEREMA. CEREMA is a French organization from the government with a lot of engineers and also research. And I am the leader of a team called Building Performance in Their Environment. So we are treating both buildings and to the district scale also, and also microclimate in this team. But my own research work has been mainly focused on the link between urban microclimate and building thermal efficiency. And I have mainly worked on modeling, and I dedicated almost 15 years to the development of a model called Soloclim Microclimate. And this model is used for the assessment of different climate adaptation solutions, such as vegetation or water aspiration or albedo, and you can compare different solutions in this model at the district scale, both on comfort but also on building performances. And yes, I have heard yesterday that there are a lot of questions about the assessment of this adaptation solution. So the question of the tools is a very challenging question. And it's challenging because it's not so easy to assess different solutions in a district, for example, in a district project, because the tools are not really adapted to represent the reality, the real world, with the different materials, with the trees like they are. And it's quite easy for shading, quite simple for wind, why not? Not so difficult, but when it's come to some phenomenon that imply vegetation or water use, it's become very difficult to assess, because you have a lot of the physical phenomenon are more complicated, and also the water availability in the soil, for example, this is not something very simple to know. And also how the soil is, what is in the soil, it's not easy. So we are developing new models in Soloclim microclimate to take into account water, such as water ponds, watering techniques on pervious surfaces, for example. Yeah, it's easy. But also water in the soil, water availability for plants. And more challenging, we are spending a lot of efforts to validate these models, because I think that a designer will want to use the models, and they need to have them the proof that they are reliable. And as I was working before on buildings, all the building energy models are validated, and there are benchmarks to validate them, and they have done their proof. For microclimate, you don't have such a process to validate them. You don't have a lot of data. You have nothing. And for the moment, we are using tools. We don't know how they are reliable, and we don't have demonstration. And perhaps this can be something we can discuss, and how we can improve that using what is developed in PhD, but also what designer, what architects or urban planner are doing in the real life, and if we can measure things, so that to help research and then have tools that are better fitting their needs.
Thank you, Marjorie. You've touched on so many important points, and I'm sure Adrian has got quite a few questions for you later on. This has been a constant debate amongst the group. And we'd like to move on with Berg, please. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to be in this panel. To be honest, I missed everything that happened before, so I'm just jumping in here. I think together a few of us here in the panel, I'm representing what you call the design group that is working on climate adaptation and developing a more sustainable urban development. I'm director of the Urbanisten based in Rotterdam. My background is the Water Square, which most of you will probably know as one of those examples where you can integrate sustainable water management, climate adaptation in a more attractive public domain, which is, I think, one of the most relevant combinations that we have to make as a designers. I'm not a scientist, so we're really going to work in practice, and not completely informed about the panel itself. I just prepared a few things that I think would be interesting to share. First of all, I'm talking about tools. I think what we do in our project is use as many tools that are available, preferably nature-based solutions. That's for sure. So get away from the technical solutions for in this case, I think specifically heat and drought and extreme rainfall. I think all of you will agree with that. Second one, of course, is that we use as much as possible our urban environments to implement these solutions. So it's an integrated approach that we need, and there we can also really add values that are more than only finding a solution for climate adaptation. It's about how we increase the comfort and the activity of our cities for people to live in. Now, so that's the main focus, I think, for us. Well, when it comes to the tools that are often developed and monitored and researched in the practice of some of the panelists, I think we just use them, and preferably we use them when they are multiple value tools. A very simple example would be to select the proper tree lines when you are working in a new urban environment, and the trees, they add so many other values than only cooling the street. They add to biodiversity. If you have the proper selection of trees, they can create places that are pleasant to meet each other, which increases social cohesion and so on and so on. So the more multiple value we have in the tools available, the better results we would have for our cities. That's a thing I want to stress. Maybe another one that comes from my lessons learned in developing projects, that it's good to have a sort of start with the local scale, to start with small things like greening a roof, making a patio a little bit more in the shadow and so on. So you get from the small and maybe also the private and cascade to bigger scales, and there, for instance, you would end up in a courtyard, in a street, in a pocket park, go to squares and larger green areas. And I think the total system that we build like that is the most the obvious way to go. So cascading our measures from small to big, I think, is very important. We try to do it in all our projects. Well, maybe last but not least, I think we also really discussed water and the cooling qualities of water. I know you probably know all the figures that compared to, for instance, shadowing our streets, active cooling by water is not that contributive as shade. Nevertheless, I think, and Herbert definitely wants to agree with me, water is also very attractive. It adds something that is just touching our senses. It's inviting, it makes the city beautiful. So it's definitely part of the repertoire, although you might say that it doesn't bring us a lot when it comes to cooling, definitely when it's not evaporating or dynamic. So we have to take that into account, and therefore I think it's important to select the proper places to implement water as a cooling element. Dense urbanized areas where a lot of people are there, where public life is at its best, that is where you could add these kind of features. They're often expensive, so not always, but they can be expensive. Playgrounds, children that can really in hot days use the water for playing around and so on and so on. So I think it would be very interesting to also there look at the added values, the quality of life brought by in this case the cooling impact of water. That's my sort of the few thoughts that I had when entering this panel.
That's great, and thank you very much. And it is actually this perspective, the complementarity between academic expertise and practice that really makes Soloclim unique. So it's great that we have all of you with us today, and we'll definitely be discussing this sort of cascading from smaller scale to larger scale is also at the heart of all our projects actually, and both Mariana and Adrian, they represent the different scales. So hopefully an interesting discussion. So we'll move on with Paolo. Morning, Paolo.
I was on mute, sorry. Thank you, and hello everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this very interesting roundtable and this very interesting topic. So just to introduce myself, I'm based in Milan. I'm Sustainable Development Director for Italy as part of in ARUP, and I'm also part of the Sustainable Development Leadership at European level. So basically working for ARUP, there's the possibility for us to look at many projects, different scales of project, different problems, the ones that have been touched already. And so personally, my experience is before an international experience, so even looking at elements like water in different climate areas, but more recently, I'm based in Milan, and I'm leading a series of projects which I found very, relevant to the discussion that we are having. So I would like to bring maybe my direct experience on a series of large master plans that we are recently and ongoing actually master plans they were developing in Milan, in which fortunately I would say the nature-based solution, both green and blue, are part of this large master plan. So one of the things that I can bring is definitely how both international developers and even national developers in Milan, especially in Milan, have understood that green and blue infrastructure are bringing, as Dirk said before, a lot of value for the people, resilience to climate change, and quality to the city overall. There are a series of challenges, of course, that we are facing, and some of them, just to touch some of them, in addition to what is being already said, is the fact that the connection between the private and the public, world and actors and stakeholders is crucial. We are moving from a traditional approach to water, which was based on gray infrastructure, and even the mentality, the mindset of many stakeholders around this theme is still based on gray infrastructure approach. So we have to be able to show to all of them the value and as Dirk said before, the fact that we have to be able to show the multiple aspects of the different benefits that an integrated approach to water-based solution can bring, even beyond the urban scale, even looking at more larger, if you like, scale, so the basin, up to the basin scale. But staying within the urban environment, I think that has been touched already, the fact that we need to understand both as the physical infrastructure or the gray infrastructure works, and having more information and more data around the natural infrastructure. So the nature, as been said before, is more difficult, we know, but we need to have the availability of data, meaning like that we need money, we need funds for that. So public administration needs money for making survey, for making analysis, and having data is clearly a key point to start with planning the future of the water strategy for a city. And so I hope to bring in the next, in the next hour in our conversation some maybe some more detailed information around some real projects and some of the challenges that we are facing here in Milan. So thanks again for having me here.
Great. Thank you very much. And it's indeed the data availability becomes quite an important issue as well, as we discuss further. We'll move on. Filip, welcome back.
Hello. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I can present myself. So I'm Filip Hamm. I am an architect. I study in Switzerland in École Polytechnique of Lausanne, and then I moved to Paris. I have my office in Paris, and so I have some teaching position in different university and in the US or in Switzerland and in France. So I think it's all I saw during these 2 days are really interesting. I think it's really good to see all this research, and so it's really a good point to have all that, you know, to cool the city, or what are the solutions for doing that. And myself, I'm involved in this type of subject since many years, and I think it's what is maybe the challenge. Of course, the most important challenge is to fight global warming and to find solution for transforming the city to resist to what will happen and what is already happened with this change of temperature and rain and in the city today. But I think also what can be interesting is to link the technical solution to question of beauty, or question of aesthetic, or question of architecture, because there is a kind of disconnection, you know, or still in the mind of a lot of architects. You know, they think that, okay, architecture is kind of way of doing building and how to design the city, like it's a traditional way of doing that. And the question we are talking during this symposium are something we need to add to that. You know, it's like a solar panel you add on your building. You just add a thermal insulation. You add a solar panel. You will add some greenery. You will add some fountain for cooling. You know, you will add some element on that. But I think it's more fundamental. You know, the transformation is not only to add devices on a way of designing building, you know, that are that was invented maybe 40 years ago. You know, like with the postmodern architecture, or the technology architecture, the high-tech architecture. You know, we need really to design again architecture itself based on this question, because it was like that in the old time, you know, before the fossil energy, you know. So it's a transformation of that, and so we have to be, all of us, we have to be courageous also to invent a new language, a new style of architecture. Sometimes I was talking about the Anthropocene style. You know, like there is a Marie Antoinette style, or there is a Art Deco style, or this kind of decorative style, modern style. But if you think about all this decoration style, you know, it always linked to a kind of material condition, you know, behind that, you know. And for example, it's quite interesting. You know, the modern style, when we talk about, okay, it's a modern house, so everything is white, there is not a lot of decoration inside, it's a very neutral, very minimal, you know, minimal architecture, like that. But this type of style, the modern style, is completely linked to the fossil energy you are using for heating, cooling, and ventilation inside. So, so in the less is more from Miss van der Rohe, or the ornament and crime by Adolphe Loos, or the white splash of Le Corbusier, you know, this idea to remove all the decoration was a consequence of the heating system and the radiator, because before, the tapestry, or the carpet, or the curtain, or the paravent, or the screen, all these type of elements were climate based. You know, it was answer the tapestry. You know, like the Middle Age tapestry in France, there is a La Licorne tapestry. You know, it's beautiful, but in reality, it was a thermal insulation. You know, not so efficient, but it was a kind of thermal insulation. So, you know, the thermal insulation of today, like I don't know, rock wool or glass wool, but it can be also like a recycled PET wool are new type of tapestry, and so they are maybe they are maybe the new type of beauty. So we have to be courageous to accept that all these questions we are talking today and yesterday will change the aesthetic of architecture and change. So this is what I would like, that all this group of people we are today, we are not only creating solution for adding on cities that is already, that is still designed like it is. We have to really rethink the design of the cities through this question you are talking about.
That's a great sort of a point to take across and move on. So we're really going to fully integrate it rather than just sort of decorative element for architecture. And last but not least, Herbert.
Thank you. Thank you for being in this symposium and taking part in the discussion. I'm a kind of advisor also to Soloclim, and I have been with the researchers on several meetings before, and I'm really excited to follow this discussion, also the one we had yesterday. And I would just like to give the ones who don't know what my background is, maybe just some short slides, because then I can explain a bit better where I'm coming from and what my actually take it on is to water-based solution in outdoor climate adaptation, which is part of this discussion. So let me maybe just share quickly some slides. It will just go quickly through some points. What I'm really interested in is to start with is also when we talk about this topic is really to learn from water itself, because when I look at water-based solutions and also nature-based solutions, is actually really what water is doing on this planet to balance extremes, either to hot or to cold. Where you have water, there is a kind of balance. And I think that's what we have somehow to rethink in our systems. I'm not a big believer in just making regulations only. I think it is very important that our whole culture needs to get a deeper understanding of water. And that's why I'm always starting to bring myself in fluid thinking. And I try to do it in research as well with my students. That can be actually in many ways. What we didn't talk about, I think, in this conference is top-down or bottom-up approach, how to get people involved in decision-making. And I think it is very important that working on different scales, we had this. And it is actually very often that our systems, our water systems have been purely engineered from A to B, and we have actually to make big changes in our cities, basically to get them really more systematic. A very important part, and I think this was covered by several people also yesterday, is talking about city scales, private and public realm, and the one in between. And I think we can only win the battle with the climate question in our cities that if we have a very strong vision for a city, not just small projects, but really a big vision. Where does a city wants to go for the next 20, 30, 50 years? And I think just the last decade was a very big exercise. Cities like Copenhagen, the Cloudburst project, I was very strong involved. The question in Hamburg, the RISA project, the ABC water guidelines in Singapore, they were all coming up with basically system thinking, how to slow down, how to store, how to evaporate, how to recycle, and how to work in different scales, how to bring cleaning into the place, but not to forget, and I think this is something I would really like to bring in, how do people actually interact with water? What's the emotional side? What's the biophilia effect? And finally, what is the impact people take? Because, I mean, it's green roofs, it's facades, everything, but it is finally the small details where people care. How do I handle and manage water in my house, in front of my doorstep? How can I let rainwater run? What do I do with swales, which can be maybe periodically flooded and then dry again? How do I do maintenance? And I think we even can go further to think about inside and outside. I know this is about outdoor, but the inside and the outdoor thing, I think is something where this research on this and on our Soloclim should maybe bring a lot of answers. You know, what can we do? And I was always fascinated on projects working on what yesterday also our friends from Transsolar was presenting. How can we actually come up with smart and clever systems for air condition? How can we use rainwater? How we can suck it in? How can we bring air condition not only for temperatures in the city in a large scale, but also in a small scale in buildings that we can run down air condition systems? Every drop of rain matters for me. I think that's very important, how to create better systems. And they always have to do both. They have to do a cleansing and they have to do a kind of evaporation system. And I will finish very shortly with this. It's very much also to bring multifunctional to that. And I think this dimension to bring also livability into this. And everywhere, I think it is very much also in the existing city, how to transform industrial sites, suburbs, industrial industry sites to a more sustainable and resilient space, and how to make these spaces also livable. And I think in this conference is very much about that we talk about what is the right process. Do we do it from a top down or bottom up? And I think somehow it needs to be both. But it is very important that landscape architecture has to take a much stronger position and should come in much, much earlier. At the moment, I'm doing a lot of consultant work to many cities, like, for example, Basel in the existing industrial chemistry area of Volta Nord, how to work there with inside the city in very, very dense spaces, how to make actually available from rooftop, from evaporation, from letting water go down. And for me, always this additional part of beauty is most important, how to bring that in. So I will finish by that. And I think this complexity of water, that we use water as a teacher, as an inspirator for our ideas, is for me in this discussion, when we talk about water-based solution, when we put water in the front, then it is very much important that we really learn how does water bring functionality and aesthetic and beauty together. And I think that's an element where we can make out of a challenge an opportunity in our city. So that's my approach, maybe to give that to this discussion. And I think I will have to stop here.
That's great. Thank you very much, Herbert. That was a really good overview from everyone. It was nice actually seeing some people in pictures. You always know when architectural photographer has come in, there are no pictures whatsoever. There've been no people, they've been eliminated. So what I suggest we do is I'm going to start with a couple of very general questions, and then our researchers are going to come in with some more specific questions so that we can kick off the debate. So if we start from, the starting point, water, it's a precious resource, water scarcity and all that. So really in thinking of how can then water-based systems for cooling be considered a sustainable option to improve urban microclimate. So with that setting point, then why and how should that integration of water-based solutions for cooling be prioritized based on their impact? Where do you prioritize? What do you use? Who would benefit most? What systems? I know there are quite a few questions in this sort of single question. So who would like to start?
Maybe we can focus on one question indeed, because there were so many.
Try, yes, yeah.
Yeah, can you?
We've got the setting point of we've got a water scarcity, so the water is quite a precious resource, and we're suggesting to use it for cooling. So how can water-based systems for cooling then be considered a sustainable option to improve if we just look at the urban microclimate interventions first? So let's start with this part of the question.
All right, well, in my kickoff, I started, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that the immediate cooling effect of water is not there when it comes to water bodies, or not always there when it comes to water bodies. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the other thing is, all right, what do you need is sort of active evaporation, or a more dynamic water bodies. And I don't know if you refer to that, but therefore you probably need already a different water quality. Not necessarily always. I'm referring to a project maybe to make it concrete as a designer that we're doing at the moment, which is in Rotterdam. It's what's called the Hofbogenpark. It's a park. It's on top of a railway line, 2 kilometers long. And we address there in this park the issue of climate adaptation. And what we do is we bring rainwater, which is not a precious resource. It's basically about balancing. Sometimes you have too much, sometimes you have too little. So what we do there is just to catch that rainwater when it's there, to clean it on the landscape that is this park, bring it down to underground aquifer. When it's clean enough that you can also bring it up again when you need it, when it's hot or when it's dry, to water the plantation that we have. But since it's relatively clean water, rainwater is relatively clean water, definitely after a simple landscape treatment, that you can start reusing that rainwater for children to be engaged in a playground, water playground, to get in touch with water, and so on and so on. I think that for me is, I don't know if this answers your question, Monica, but that would be my approach. It's not about the precious resource. It's about really finding smart systems that we collect the water when we have abundance of it, that we can reuse it when we need it for specific purposes, and they can be manifold. Agree with Herbert and also with Filip that we take into account beauty here, or the aesthetics. Also, it's important to really take into account how people can be engaged, how you can activate a community by bringing water into your cityscapes. That for me would be an approach. I don't know if it answers your question, or at least it starts a debate on how we can work on this issue.
Very much, doesn't it addresses the issue of, it's not about using the resource, but actually using what is already there, and which could be quite problematic in many areas. And how do you do this? So I suppose then it follows, this integration cycle, or when you need to start prioritizing. We're discussing quite a lot about design guidelines, or users ask for guidance, or how should we do systems, how do we prioritize, where do we intervene, what would be your approach in that? So where do you use it, which spaces would benefit most, what systems? So how do you provide this hierarchy of strategies, both from the theoretical and then sort of the user perspective as well?
Can I say something? In the Netherlands, of course, we have lots of rainfall, so we have to discharge over a lot of rainfall. But because of drought, we need, of course, to preserve it as well and put it into the ground, or keep it locally. And locally would best be in the ground. So we're trying to do this better at the moment. So keep your groundwater tables higher if possible. Put store water in the ground locally, and so it's available for the green. But one of the results of research before, like Berg also said, is that cooling with water does not really help. And so we're not looking so much at cooling the area by spraying water, or by having surface water that this cools it, but we have the surface water either to in fact, in the Netherlands, it's there to discharge the water. We have lots of surface water to be able to discharge the water. But if you make it accessible and make it nice, then it can cool at the moment that people are close to it, or really into it. And the example they gave about using rainwater and purify it and then use it for children, I really like this, because Often people are very scared about this because there might be some dog shit somewhere, or maybe the birds that poo in it, and there might be some problems. I'm not so afraid of this, but many people are. And if you can't do this, then you always have to either really purify it or to use drinking water, and then it gets impossible. So I really hope we can move towards having some risk in the urban environment, and people having a small risk of getting diarrhea is not so bad as not using this water anymore.
Anybody else would like to comment from the designer's perspective, perhaps, or from the analysis?
Maybe I just join here the discussion. What I think is probably a point we should really dive into also in our research here in this Soloclim project is that we often, and this is something I see very often in discussions with governments and municipalities, that the real courage to move forward is very often limited because we think we cannot do very much because our cities are created in a way that we cannot change them. And I think that's something which is understandable from our perspective right now. But if we look back, let's say like 40, 50 years, we see how much change happened in an area or in a city. And I think cities who really, from a planner perspective, if we can actually give the courage and the perspective to have a longer view, because water cannot be seen in a, let's say, in a period of 10 years. The water system and the water regime is actually, we have to see over a very, very long period of time. And when we see how fast the climate change is actually happening right now, we have to help cities to have much bigger visions and to have the courage to make really a change and an impact. And I think that's probably a thing what we have to bring in from the academic side, but also from a practitioner side. And I think we had seen yesterday very great examples of also having very radical changes and radical system thinking. But I think it was also very well said from Thomas Auer, for example, that the time of big science fiction things are also over. Yeah, we actually have to see that our visions for the future have to be very, very pragmatic, have to be very much down to earth, have to be very much people orientated. And I think that cities cannot be actually planned from a top-down approach. We need that, but we need also to get a kind of, I would say, cultural shift in the society, which is more than just thinking about 4 to 5 or 8 years where the next mayor will be elected. I think the water story needs a much longer breeze and a much longer perspective. And the cities who have, like Rotterdam or Copenhagen or Singapore, or also a lot of cities now in US, where they have the courage to have a real vision, what should be the city look like in 50 years, then they can break it down to small projects, and then they can really make an impact. I think this kind of question of time, of space, and of visions need to be very, very strong if we want to have an impact on water-based solutions in our cities.
Thank you, Herbert. Berg, I think you were trying.
Maybe to very quick, not only to agree, but I think it would be interesting because we discussed the scale. I think we have to move through scales, I would say. The moment we were, for instance, working on the water plan finished water plan for Antwerp, really on the city scale. Same time you have projects. I think the most interesting scale, at least is what I see in my project, is the district scale. Because on the district scale, you can both, I would say, change the system and also organize the projects that make it possible for people to be engaged. I think the city scale is too big of a scale to really organize really the sort of participation that you can achieve on a district scale. In a project scale, behind me have the water square. It was the result of a very intense cooperation with the inhabitants and the people that are using the square. But that's obvious, I think. But the district scale for me is really the most relevant scale to combine the system and the project and have the physical impact really on the in the public space and in the built environment.
Provide a good link between the different scale that we keep talking about. Thank you both. Adrian, would you like to continue with the
No, I think the conversation is very interesting when talking about for the first question on scarcity and this climate variations that we're having. Of course, we have participants from the Netherlands that you have an excess of water, but of course, there's other areas where water is a little bit more scarce. So it's absolutely interesting to find solutions for this dichotomy when you have too much water in a season, and then you need extra water in another season, hot, dry season. So for sure, we have been discussing a lot, storing water. Even with Herbert, I remember in the past we discussed about recycling water from buildings, bringing gray waters as well after some cleaning and so on. And the question as well is interesting when you talk about, or when you think about having this scarcity situation and bringing it to using it in my example for prototyping. So most of them, they are, when you evaporate water, you're consuming that water in somehow, and that gives a lot to talk about. So I think it's very interesting, the conversation itself. However, I will go forward with one of my questions. And we have several questions that have been already touched within this discussion, so we will try to just go through them. For the first one, what are the significant challenges encountered when designing water-based cooling systems? And I will put it, I will link it to another one, so we make it maybe a straightforward answer. What do you think would be the biggest innovation in technological development for both scales, micro and macro scales? So some of the challenges around it and what's coming in the technological development.
That really caused quite a big headache.
Okay, let's start with some challenges. Herbert, or maybe Dirk, I am aware of the work in Rotterdam. It's quite interesting how you're storing water, reducing the amount of water going to the sewages in flooding moments. So maybe you can elaborate something on your challenges surrounding that. Because, for example, Herbert was talking about the design from top down as well, and we crossed to something more collaborative, and now there is something as well with data driven, and then Marialena as well can come in. But first, please, let's talk about
what I see in my project as something that really needs to improve, and also is blocking some of the things that I think we all know that are available already. It's not even about innovations. It's just simple that we have an enormous toolbox of measures for climate adaptation developed. It's how to bring that into practice, I think, is really the more important thing here. And more and more what you see, apart from the grand projets that you can implement is with the proper amount of finance, with project developers that are also working on it's more and more also about, let's say, linking this to maintenance programs, to let's say the day-to-day improvement of our cityscapes. That's the renewal of the sewage or the improvement of the pavements is also the moment to change, to make a difference. And that is still really difficult, because these maintenance programs in cities, they are organized in a different way. They have a different time frame. They're organized in silos. So when you say, well, we want to integrate a more climate adaptive layout for our streetscapes, it's difficult, because then the sewage guys say, no, but we're not on time here. So the finance of these projects is different. Also lacking money often to really take some qualitative improvements in this maintenance of the city. So for me, I think what I see is that in this everyday improvement of our cities, which is more about linking to maintenance programs and so on, it's really difficult to organize quality and a higher ambition on climate adaptation. In big projects, we manage. In new projects, we'll manage. But in this cityscape that we have, it's really a problem. And it's governance, it's how money flows through these governments and so on and so on.
Thank you. I think it's quite interesting, the maintenance part, absolutely. When I'm creating these prototypes, I'm always trying to think on how they will operate and how will they be maintained through the time.
Can I jump in on that one, if I can? Following what Dirk said, I mean, one of the challenges, I think, is definitely related to, just to put in practical terms, sometimes related to the ownership of the lands. Meaning like what is public and what is private. Yeah. So when we talk about maintenance, we talk about more than it's maintenance, but it's operation. The way of saying, okay, what type of regulations do we have? What type of measures? How the different departments are organized? So all these elements, and together with the set of codes and regulations at the different levels, we have. So one of the key questions is how we can transcend these barriers, how we can create a better integration between all the different levels, the public, the private, and this means essentially that we need to have a long-term view and integrated strategic planning of this infrastructure. To say something like that, like just to bring some of our experiences, one of the problems, like if we look at water from a natural point of view and from a circular point of view, nature doesn't, and the water doesn't have any barrier, any boundaries really. No, you collect the water, you distribute the water. The water is a natural element. And when the natural element touches or faces the physical constraints that we have created, as well as the laws, the codes, the non-material, immaterial constraints that we have created, then we find the clashes between the two different elements, the natural elements and the anthropic elements, following what Filip was saying. And so how we can combine these two elements? Just to make an example, in Milan, we are very lucky from a water point of view. Then we have several problems, flooding, uprising of the table water, okay. And also we have a very mineral city that needs to become greener. And this is something that is happening. But we are lucky because we have an amount of water underground, which gives us a lot of opportunities. City is a city on water, Milan. It is really sitting on the water. The water is like a mattress of water, really, the soil of Milan. And this gives us the opportunity to think in a circular way, to take the water to use for a series of different purposes that go back to the aquifer. This circularity, which is which is following the natural element of water, sometimes touches and finds some barriers, and one of the barriers is the way, as I said, of dealing between, the liaison between the private and the public areas, and sometimes you find solutions which would allow to increase the possibility related to the circularity of water, which are stopped by the other types of barrier, which are not physical, actually are like ownership of the land. So we need to, or as we said, operations related issues. So I think that is an area in which we really need to improve a lot. And as I said before, having also physical models, digitalized physical models would help a lot to predict in the future, together with an integrated strategic planning in which both the public and the private merge together and trying to find a solution. So I think that's something that we are facing, and there's a big room for improvement there.
That's really an really interesting point, and it keeps coming back to the discussion in all the sessions, effectively, understandably so, and this private public, with this sort of false dichotomy in some way, so how it's going to be addressed. I'm conscious, Adrian, you also had a question around sort of modeling and tools. So I suppose that's a natural bridge, and perhaps Marjorie for
Yes,
her expertise as well.
Actually, my next two questions are in these two topics: the public and private, and the measuring. So, does it make more sense maybe that I continue with the public and private?
Okay.
Just to continue with the topic, and I don't know if anybody wanted to elaborate on the previous as well, but
thing, if I'm allowed, because I like to say that your ideas of the prototypes and also my idea of the urban typologies with specific characteristics, and then you work out prototypes for each typology. I think that's one of the ways to work forward with climate adaptation, because if you have this master plan and then all those prototypes, and then you will have to wait the moment at which a certain location is retrofitted, is redone because of maintenance. So you need to be ready, to my opinion, to make an area climate adaptive at the moment that other projects are started. So that's why I believe in this prototyping. I saw Berg more or less saying no.
Well, I'm indeed a little bit in doubt, Jeroen, here. Partly from the fact that I think from a scientific point of view, and let's say also from a creativity point of view, you should continuously be innovative in the tools and the prototypes that we have. So I'm not against prototyping, but I think at the same time we already have an abundance of what I call tools or prototypes available. I think that for me is not, when it comes to how can we make how can we move a little bit faster forward, or how can we be more effective in climate adaptation? I think it's not the issue that we lack knowledge about typologies, that we don't have enough tools available. For me, that's not the thing that is the key to how to move forward. I think it's really how to use these tools, how they can be combined in different scales, how they indeed could move from the private to the public domain, and so on and so on. So it's more about how to bring them into practice than that we are lacking them.
Yeah, but I think it's more or less the same, and you're a front runner in this field, but there are many municipalities which are not at all, and they just need the examples and shown that it's normal and the best thing to do, and then they need simple arguments. Okay, we're going to redo this road, we have to reconstruct the sewer system or to replant trees, and I want to do it in this way. And I think this will help very much for most of the cities.
Oh, that's true, Jeroen, and indeed, and we also with our office contributed to that. So for instance, the Flemish city of Ghent, they really wanted to have a clear set of measures that they can bring into the daily maintenance of streets and parks that are more climate adaptive, that are not based on the technical system of a combined sewer and so on. So they now have this toolbox, and they need to be implemented. And that is what I was talking about, really also how to organize this from a government point. All these silos, that is where things are going wrong at the moment.
That's the best way to bring together the two perspectives for a lively debate. And I'm conscious of time, and we've got quite a few questions.
Yes, maybe Mariana, would you like to elaborate on something as well?
Yes, I had this question about the cultural aspects, but also I'm actually very curious about innovation, and especially, like, I know, for example, the city of Paris, there's very interesting examples and innovations in the field with like these water solutions. So I would like to hear from, or maybe Marjorie, about Marjorie, on top of your head, like some maybe innovations you are excited about, or maybe could speak a little bit about your work.
In fact, I think it's very simple innovation, and as we are now talking about nature-based solution or water-based solution, we are coming back to very simple solution based on water diffusion in materials or things like that. It is not because it's quite simple solution in their physical phenomena, that it's very easy to understand how it will work correctly. And for example, we are working on evaporative pavements. It's not easy to have these pavements that are good for rain in winter, so that rain won't stay, and also from when it's very cold, and efficient for summer, so that to refresh just a little, but not to have so hot surfaces. And we are working on how to make this kind of pavement, but also how to represent them in models, so that to be able to show to designer or to city planner how it will work and how it will improve comfort. And yes, I think innovation can often be very simple, based on simple things in this case, in water case, because water is a quite simple element. So you have to store it, you have to diffuse it, you have to manage it, and it's I think it's like vegetation. It's not natural element, and so perhaps we won't have to search for very complicated things. And we are also working on how to refresh roads, just having water going through it, and then using the water, the heat in the water, for example, for a swimming pool. And then we will have refreshed the road just with tubes in the road or things like that, or just in the structure of the road, you can have the water coming in it, and then you can use the water, and then you won't have the evaporation. You just have a refreshment, and the water is the liquid to refresh the road. So based on water, I think it's quite there is few techniques, just how to use the good materials, how to manage water in this material. But yes, it's I think most of the research for technical things are on the materials, on their porosity, on how to design this material so that they will be efficient.
I was sort of curious to maybe also link to Filip in the panel. I was in Paris. You talked about the aesthetics of architecture, and maybe change the aesthetics of architecture, being also aware of its climate adaptive task. You know, I was in Paris in Billancourt, and there was this beautiful École Biodiversité, where we see really how new materials, Marjorie, that are, let's say, conceptualized for other purposes than, let's say, the modern architecture that Filip, you mentioned from Corbu, for instance, that we also really get into new architecture based on these new materials with different values. I would be curious about how you, as an architect, would reflect on that.
Yes, I think you know, the question of sustainability was first driven by the economy of energy, you know, because you know, the old building have no thermal insulation, so it was the most important problem at the beginning of the conversation, maybe like 20 years ago, but also 10 years ago. So it's been in Switzerland or in Germany, you know, you have this kind of passive house or Minergie program that request to have like 20 centimeters of thermal insulation or 25 centimeters of thermal insulation. But in France, it was still an old regulation talking about 9 centimeters. So 9 centimeters is not efficient enough, you know, to block the loss of energy, of heat during the winter. And so the first change in France was linked, you know, it was strange because some building, they start to have a weak thermal insulation with 9 centimeters, but wood or stone, sometimes with a thermal bridge, you know, so the construction was not so good. And the And so, but the people, they were starting to talk a lot about wood and stone, you know, like how to improve the question of sustainability, but with more talking about the image of the building, you know. So it was a wood building, or it was full of trees, but the thermal insulation was still 9 centimeters, so it was not efficient enough, you know. So what we know today is that, you know, there is some study of the Graz University. They start to study a lot of building, and now what we know that, okay, if you have no more 9 centimeters of thermal insulation, but 20 centimeters of thermal insulation, or 25 centimeters of thermal insulation, so it means that you reduce a lot the emission of CO2. And so it means at the end, the question of the CO2 emission from the material itself, if it is wood or steel, or if it is concrete, cement, or stone, become more important. It's become you know, half maybe of the problem, because before it was only 1/4 of the problem. So if you are not solving the thermal insulation problem first, that was 3/4 of the problem. To solve only to have trees on the roof was not really a solution. It was more like an image for the real estate company, you know. And so today I think there is a lot of progress about material. So in Paris today, you know, all the architects, they are really interesting to work with stone, with wood. And so there is a big change in the mind of the architect, and the question of thermal insulation is also there, but normally it have to change, because the thermal regulation, that the old one was from 2012, it have to change to the new one of 2020, but it takes time to change completely. But it means that. So there is a change today, you know, the question of the ecology, of the sustainability is completely changing, and today it's quite interesting also to see that there is a very young generation that emerged maybe 10 years ago, and that was working a lot with concrete. And so they are young, but they are already no more in fashion, you know, because today to work with cement and concrete is not so, it's complicated to define your project with that. So it means, you know, a generation that was very successful like 4 years ago, maybe already collapsed, you know, because of this problem of the CO2 emission of the cement.
So we really need to take the discussion back to the water before we cut off by the time. Yes.
Can I say something about just picking up this energy part, which I think is an interesting part related to water? Because if we look at 2-3 different elements of water, one is what is the impact of water, like such as also green infrastructure in terms of the impact on the energy consumption of buildings, and this, without getting into technical, you know, very technical aspects, what I think is very relevant is the fact that we are moving, fortunately, from considering the buildings and the public realm as separate things. So that is one of the boundaries that we have definitely to, you know, overcome, to break these barriers, and to say, okay, we have to think about something which is strictly connected. And this is strictly connected from an environmental point of view, but also in terms of energy. If you connect water to energy, then there's a lot of possibilities. As Marjorie said before, you can use also water to impact positively on the climate, on the microclimate of the city. But the water, and going back to my point, which is, I think, for me, is innovation. When you're asking about innovation, of course, innovation is the technical solutions, but to me, probably the most important thing is innovation in the process. So when we consider circularity of water and the water flow along the process, the more we are circular, the more we use water for different purposes, the better is the result. And in terms of energy, again, the experience in Milan, because of what I said before, we are using water for energy. If we look beyond the urban scale, we are looking at, like, in 10, 20 years time, 2030, 2035, to doubling up the consume of water in terms of energy generation. This is not just for urban environment, it's overall. So there's a connection, a strong connection between water and energy worldwide. And we need to understand how to capture from water the most of the benefits, even in terms of energy, because there are a lot of possibilities. If we reduce down, even passively, reduce down the temperature of the city, then the buildings will consume less energy, especially in summertime. And here the climate change plays an important role as well.
Yeah, yes, I would have a complementary point. If you have a city that is more humid and you continue to use cooling systems, you will have more loads on your cooling systems, and then you will consume more energy for cooling buildings. So we have to be very careful also.
No, I totally agree. Sorry to jump in. I totally agree with you. In fact, the conditions
Yes,
and the
can be
control
very interesting, or also if you use a cooling system, it won't be. So we have to choose.
Can I bring in a different angle in terms of the cultural aspect of water, which particularly with climate change, we start changing the way we view it or our associations with it. Mariana, would you like to?
Yeah, because it's a question I have on my own research is because with changing climates, and we know, for example, you already mentioned it, Paolo, like in Italy, it's changing. People have a different relation to water, and now that maybe it's changing because we have more floods. And in the Netherlands as well, there's like this cultural relation with water that might be also be changing because of extreme heat, and now maybe we need more water for cooling. And I don't know, maybe you just give your international panel, and you're either based in the different cities and countries, or you have projects internationally. So I would like maybe to hear your views on cultural aspects of water, and then maybe can we generalize rules to water in cities, and when they become context specific, and be nice to hear about it. Yep.
Well, I coming from the Netherlands, I mean, talking about culture. It's a bit of an open door, but nevertheless, let's start with that. I think that, of course, we are a city a country that has water basically all around it, coming from four sides, from the mountains, from the sea, from below and from above. And we have an extremely rich tradition and history of living with water. And I think one thing that we saw, let's say, the past century was that it was very much also about fighting against water, right? And then, let's say, technical solutions come in. And that is a culture change that I see happening in our country, but is still not completely there. Is that how can we embrace this condition of climate change, and how can we live with water? How can we give it a proper place, and more natural-based solutions are definitely part of that. So it's from let's say living with water to fighting against water. I think returning to a culture of living with water in a more sustainable way, and we really do our best, but I think there is also a long way to go there.
Yes, Herbert.
I think it's a very good question about this cultural shift in our society, and I have to say that, I mean, I have been working in this field since 1980, discussing about how is actually the society ready to take on responsibility, and not only from the government, from a top down, but also from political background in the society. And I think there's a completely change now. I mean, give you one example, the discussion, for example, here in Germany after this flooding we had and this disasters we had, is now so that it is maybe not the top one in politics at the moment, but it is very, very high and on a very high level. And people are ready to take on actually decisions to make changes. I think much easier than before. And I would just like to put this point also in our discussion. It's also about money. It's about financing things. The European community, the European Union has actually started to bring a lot of money into the Green Deal programs. And the big question is, where will this money actually go to? And of course, big industry and big companies are all interested to actually do something in that field. But actually at the moment, it's really interesting what I see, that a lot of the smaller industry companies, like the companies who are working in the green sector, for example, greening the cities, the topic we are talking in this symposium, they are often too late to get these budgets. And to get them into business is actually that they have to articulate their needs, and that they can actually bring solutions into the programs for cities. And that needs to be, they need a very strong support from the basically from the culture of the society. And I think this change is really helping, that the industry is ready to take on risks and really to push forward. Innovation is coming not only from government organization by pushing by regulations. It's really coming out of the industry by finding new and better solutions. And they need actually clients, and their clients is very often the public realm, the private sector, and that needs that the society has an awareness. So I think this cultural question what you have is extremely important for the change process. And it's happening.
It's encouraging to see sort of a very slow sort of steps forward. Adrian, you've got a last question on tools before we start wrapping up.
Yes, because I missed my chance before that you introduced the question. Thank you for bringing it, Marialena. Okay. What, in your opinion, as practitioners, academics as well, what is your, what do you think? What is your opinion on the different models, simulation tools to integrate and evaluate all these water-based solutions? And maybe you can elaborate as well a little bit on how do you measure the results, the effects of the cooling effect, and if that brings something to retrofit your designs, your ideas, your projects.
I can go if no one is going. Just to say that, of course, as Arup, we are looking at we have an history, in terms of modeling tools for many different aspects, and I'm kind of repeating myself, but I think that we definitely need to have tools that are fed by physical data. So like we need to have physical data. So what we are doing now is definitely trying in some of the projects that we have, or involving, sorry, my daughter is here, that's live. Apologize for that. Apologize for that, really.
Oh, no need to apologize. If nothing else, the last 18 years have told us that children, pets, everyone is welcome in meetings. So
yes, exactly. Everything has changed. I definitely agree. And I was saying that that is so important, I think, to get the data because there's also, as we know in other fields, and as I said at the beginning, the level of complexity of testing, assessing, and implementing these type of solutions into the environment cannot be wrong. I mean, we need to get information from what we do, what we physically now build or release or make, and informing the process. That would also is not just for the sake of the process, for the sake of the project, is really to show to the people and to all the different stakeholders the benefits of this. And I think the people, the community has to be involved, and going back to the cultural aspects, which is also connected to the tools, using digital means to change the cultural approach, the behavior. So the more the people, the citizens are supporting this type of, because there's a demand for that. We also see in Italy, and depends where you are in Italy. Of course, there are areas, most of the areas are very strong connected to nature. But if you are living in an urban area, which was developed over the past decades based on a different type of model, then there's a demand, a need for the people to get back to be connected to nature. So we have to also use tools to have a movement of people that can support the the step change also in terms of what they ask for the quality of the city. So I think tools means a lot of things, and modeling, data, but also app, and and having people engaged in this process.
Thank you. And indeed, getting data to validate models, particularly for the types of spaces that we're discussing, is much more challenging, and it's one of the areas that we need more information to get the confidence to convince clients, I suppose, and who we're communicating with about the accuracy of potential results. I think probably have one more question before we move to the live audience upstairs that will be joining us later on. So in terms of trying to wrap it up, moving towards the future, given the wider challenges that we face, dare I say, even opportunities, what do you see to be the future of water-based interventions in the short, sort of medium, and then in the long term? So in terms of two different timescales, effectively.
Well, to be honest, I'm not only an optimistic guy, but I'm also optimistic about what I see happening in my field of urbanism and landscape architecture. I think, well, we're living in an era of change, but it's definitely clear that we need a different approach to how we build our cities, and it's more and more become part of our agenda. If we start a project, it's impossible not to have climate adaptation, sustainability, nature inclusive design as part of our design tasks. That is really different from 10 years ago. So I think we're, in that sense, the awareness is there. It definitely needs time. We need innovation and so on, but I'm quite optimistic about, let's say, that there's more and more awareness that we need this fundamental change in how we approach our landscapes and our cities and make them more sustainable. It takes time, but we're really moving forward and moving in the right direction. I'm optimistic about that.
Yes, it's nice to sort of start wrapping up with a sense of optimism as well. Jeroen?
I'm normally very optimistic, but because of climate change, I'm not sure about anymore. In fact, I'm quite afraid of real large heat waves, which we can't just stop by having more trees in the city. It will get warmer. It will, like we had 40 degrees in the Netherlands, not this year, but the year before. We never had this before. And all the trees in the city don't help. You need air conditioning to have a nice place. Look at what happened in Canada. Of course, we don't want to have this here, but look at all the floodings which can happen. You can't design for this. So there will be more and more real problems. On the other hand, I see people are more aware of this. People, climate adaptation, the fact that climate change can help to make people aware of that they have a role in making their own place livable. And maybe we should also some way misuse the climate adaptation to make people aware and to use it for social changes in the urban area. But on the long run, I'm a bit pessimistic about that we can keep ahead of the climate change. Sorry.
Also increasingly difficult. We're trying to, I suppose, for the sake of these sessions, we're trying to differentiate between vegetation and trees, water, responsive system, but realistically, it's quite difficult to consider them in isolation. And that's why it keeps coming back to these interactions and integrations, and the more holistic view, whichever scale we look at it, it's quite difficult to say, I'm only going to do one or the other. Yes, Herbert?
Yeah, just to come to your question about short and long-term vision. I think the Soloclim project, there's no better time than now to do that. And I think your research is spot on. I think innovation and new systems thinking is the best time now. A lot of things are coming up because we did talk about the culture, we did talk about the needs, we did talk about the competition of cities, who has the best solution, because that's also happening right now, quite a lot between America, Europe, and Asia. The long-term vision, I'm also a little bit more pessimistic. I think we are too late. I think the changes we will have for the next generations will be so dramatic that we actually almost cannot cope with it totally. Some parts of cities will have been totally given up or have to change completely. I think we will have enormous social and political challenges in the future because of the climate. So from the long-term perspective, we should have been much faster. I was in Paris for COP21 with my wife. I know how difficult it was to find an agreement. And when I see what is happening actually from a political level, how many actually countries are just talking, including my own country where I live, and how little action is actually happening on the big scale. I'm on the long term, I'm really pessimistic, but there is never a reason to give up. There's always a kind of hope which is needed. And I think that's a driver for research and a driver for our work.
Thank you very much. I'm Herbert, and we've got time. We do have questions from a live audience upstairs. Federica?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, I'm gonna read a couple of questions that came up during your discussion. The first one comes from Emma. I'm gonna read what she's asking. As a citizen of Milan, my ears perked up when I saw the proposed swimming area you showed yesterday in the master plan for Milan. I live next to the Darsena in Milan, and having seen the initiative in Paris to clean the Seine in anticipation of the 2024 Olympic Games, I dream of one day swimming in Milan's Darsena. In broad strokes, what does the cleaning process entail? Are some bodies of water more suitable than others?
Yeah, no, I think that the question was quite specific in a way, but I'm aware of the Darsena, I'm aware of the project, but I'm not aware of of course the technical aspects of it. I think, but generally speaking, I think in Milan we are actually looking at the possibility to increase the number of I don't say swimming pool, but water features, water ponds, or things like that. Also, what we said before about the humidity is quite important, quite relevant. So we have to deal with that aspect. Of course, in terms of using water for sport activities, swimming activities, it's a quite relevant topic. And sometimes we have to think about the fact that not all the entire water pond or water feature has to be made suitable for swimming, because there's an implication, of course, of treatment of water as well. So I mean, the question is quite, it's very difficult to answer without being involved in the project. But I think maybe Piero Pellizzaro might have more information later on, from the city of Milan. But definitely, I think having possibility to have people enjoying water even in cities is definitely a good point, balancing the natural aspect and the energy aspect as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Federica, and one last question.
Yes, the second question comes from Valentina that asks, many cities were located in their specific sites due to the presence of water, but during the century, we have neglected the relationship between water and the city. Water is the element that can help to have a new climate responsive configuration of urban spaces and neighborhoods. How can we involve, convince, and educate better designers to work with water and consider its multiple aspects in the same project?
Any takers for the last challenging question of the session? We haven't made it easy for you, that's for sure.
I think I can answer in a part. I think there is a lot of work on nature-based solution, and water will come with all these nature-based solution. And there is a lot of progress and interest in nature-based solution. So it will enter with all the other solutions.
if I can very briefly say that from the designer point of view, I think is quite, I mean, is another aspect of what we said before about the processes. I mean, bringing together different competencies means to make better projects and having better involvement of the different stakeholders. So I think, again, you might say like follow the water. So if you follow the water, you understand how many people you have to bring in order to make a good job in a way, no? So that might be a kind of conclusion, follow the water.
That's particularly relevant, and I suppose it goes back to a point it was made yesterday about it's truly a multidisciplinary field. When we start looking at all these wider remit of Soloclim, it's impossible to just limit it on a single discipline. We really want to bring everyone in, and we need to bring them in early rather than just lip service at the end of whatever project is there just to tick a box. So I would like to thank you all very, very much for your time and your energy. I know quite a few of you have been with us for sort of a full couple of days. We really appreciate it. We appreciated your expertise and particularly from the researchers' point of view. I mean, at the end of the day, Soloclim is a training network, and you know, our 6 researchers have benefited enormously from interacting with you and your work and your ideas. So thank you all very much. And so I would like to give a final applause for.
Yeah, thank you.
And we hope to see you back after a short lunch break for a final session on interactive systems with another excellent panel of researchers, sort of architects, engineers, and representatives from the municipality of Milan. Thank you. Bye-bye.